Chapter 1. Shadows in the Frame. In the winter of 1943, Warsaw was a city divided by fear and silence. German patrols moved through the streets with mechanical precision, while the civilians learned to walk without sound. Every corner, every open window could mean danger or death. Amid this suffocating occupation lived Hanna Krawiec, a 23-year-old translator who worked in a small pharmacy once owned by her father. Like many Poles under German rule, she had learned to survive through adaptation. Speaking fluent German, following orders when seen, and resisting in the moments no one watched. On a cold February morning, as Hanna crossed Marszałkowska Street, a German military photographer raised his camera. He was documenting order in occupied Warsaw, a propaganda project meant to show how calm the city had become under Nazi control. In his frame, among soldiers and civilians, appeared Hanna. She didn't even realize she had been photographed. But that single photograph would change her life. 2 weeks later, Hanna was summoned to the German Kommandantur. The reason? Language proficiency evaluation. It was a polite term for recruitment. Her file now contained that photograph. A young woman with intelligent eyes and a calm posture. To the German authorities, she looked useful. Hanna was assigned to assist in the translation of captured documents and prisoner interrogations. It was the kind of position that offered access and risk. Translators stood between truth and survival. Every word they spoke could save a life or end one. At first, she followed orders mechanically. She translated reports, typed forms, and kept her head down. But within weeks, she began to notice patterns, the same train numbers appearing in different reports, the same destinations marked verlegt, transferred. She realized these were deportation convoys. Thousands of people were being sent east, and she was holding the schedules in her hands. Hanna began to memorize what she read. Names, times, routes. And then, late at night, she whispered those details to members of the underground. She had become an informant, one of the countless invisible spies of occupied Poland. No one in the Kommandantur suspected her. She was polite, efficient, fluent. Even the German officers described her as unremarkable, a word that kept her alive. But fate has a way of turning even the smallest detail into a weapon. In March 1943, a German officer named Emil Weiss, the same man who had taken that street photograph, arrived at the press section where Hanna worked. His job was to catalog confiscated photographs, images taken by Polish civilians before the occupation. Among them, he found his own picture of a young woman in a scarf walking through the snow. Her face was calm, but her eyes were defiant. He didn't know her name, but he remembered her. Days later, he saw her again, inside the Kommandantur, typing reports for the intelligence division. Their eyes met across the corridor. For a brief second, he hesitated. That hesitation was the beginning of everything that followed. Weiss approached her under the pretext of translation work. What he didn't know was that Hanna was already working against him, secretly passing information to the Polish Home Army. And what she didn't know was that Weiss was also keeping secrets of his own. In the archives discovered after the war, Weiss's personal notes would reveal that he had grown disillusioned with the Nazi regime. He had begun documenting not propaganda, but evidence, photographs of mass arrests, public executions, and deportations. His camera had turned into a silent witness. Hanna and Weiss became reluctant allies. Through coded translations and misplaced files, they built a fragile network of mutual risk. Every day was a performance, she pretending to obey, he pretending not to notice. But in April 1943, everything began to unravel. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising erupted just streets away from the Kommandantur. Flames and smoke rose into the sky as Jewish resistance fighters made their final stand. The German command ordered full documentation of the event, and Weiss was assigned to photograph it. Hannah was ordered to translate the corresponding reports. That meant she was reading the lists of names, units, and execution orders in real time. It also meant she was dangerously close to discovery. One evening, when she returned home, she found her door slightly open. On her table lay a single object, a printed photograph. Her photograph, the one taken months earlier. Someone had left it there as a warning. To this day, no one knows who placed it. Some historians believe it was Weiss, a signal that she had been identified and that she needed to disappear. Others think it was a Gestapo officer who had begun to suspect her. What is certain is this. That night, Hannah vanished from Warsaw's records. For years, her name appeared in no document, no list, no testimony. Only decades later, when the archives of the German press department were declassified, researchers found a final entry under Weiss's name. Translator Krawiec, reassigned. Destination unknown. Chapter 2. The Double Life. When Hannah Krawiec vanished from Warsaw in the spring of 1943, her name simply dissolved into the fog of occupation. No arrest record, no deportation list, no confirmed sighting. To the German authorities, she had been reassigned. To the Polish underground, she had become a ghost. But ghosts, as history often shows, have a way of leaving footprints. Months later, in the archives of the German press office in Krakow, a packet of confiscated photographs arrived for cataloging. Inside was a single negative. A portrait of a woman in civilian clothing looking away from the camera. The catalog sheet listed it as Translator, Kommandantur Warsaw, subject number 1243. No name. Just a face. When the image was developed, it revealed something subtle but extraordinary. Pinned to the woman's collar was a brooch, a small silver swallow. To most eyes, it was meaningless. But to members of the Polish underground, that swallow was a code symbol. It identified a courier. Historians now believe that the photograph was intentionally staged, that Hannah herself had allowed it to be taken, knowing it would pass through the censorship office. Hidden in the folds of her collar, tiny pinholes formed a pattern, a Morse message embedded in the photograph itself. Decoded decades later, the message read, "Transport East, 2 days, Bridge Depot." It was the exact information that allowed the resistance to sabotage a deportation train near Siedlce in April 1943, rescuing over 50 prisoners. In other words, Hannah had not disappeared. She had simply gone underground. Between mid-1943 and early 1944, the Polish Home Army recorded a series of intelligence leaks that seemed to come from inside the German administration. They called the unknown informant Swallow, Jaskółka. Her reports were typed on official paper, stamped, and slipped into the resistance's courier chain, hidden inside medical shipments. The details she provided, convoy numbers, supply routes, German troop rotations, were accurate beyond doubt. Too accurate. Whoever she was, she had access to the highest levels of occupation intelligence. For months, Swallow became one of the most valuable assets in occupied Poland. Her reports were smuggled to London through the Polish government in exile, influencing Allied operations in Eastern Europe. Her handwriting never appeared. Her name was never spoken aloud, only her code name, Swallow. And yet, one piece of the puzzle remained mysterious: the photographer, Emil Weiss. Weiss continued his assignment through late 1943, documenting what Nazi officials called the restoration of order, which, in truth, meant executions, deportations, and the erasure of the Warsaw Ghetto. But within his personal notebooks, discovered after the war, a different narrative was unfolding. In several entries, he mentioned the girl with the eyes that do not forgive. He wrote of leaving coded rolls of film in abandoned stairwells, of watching her vanish into the alleys of Warsaw. And in one note, dated May 1943, he wrote, "She is not gone. She works in silence, where language cannot reach. I can only document what she cannot say." Some historians believe Weiss was the link, passing her messages through the German photo archives, embedding them in contact sheets and prints that traveled freely between Warsaw, Krakow, and Berlin. It was a system so elegant that no one suspected it. Photographs, after all, were considered propaganda, not intelligence. In early 1944, something changed. The Swallow transmissions stopped. The last coded report, dated February 9th, contained just one word: fire. 3 weeks later, the Gestapo raided a safe house near Piotrków Trybunalski. They found typewriters, false documents, and medical supplies, but no people. According to survivor testimonies, a young woman matching Hannah's description escaped moments before the raid, disguised as a Red Cross nurse. After that, her trail went cold again. When the Red Army entered Warsaw in January 1945, Soviet officers seized what remained of the German archives. Among them, a box labeled Photo Evidence, Warsaw Sector. Inside were hundreds of negatives. One of them showed a destroyed bridge, burned train cars, and in the foreground, a woman's hand holding a small silver brooch shaped like a swallow. The image was partially overexposed, but it matched the brooch Hannah had worn in her photograph from 1943. It was the last visual trace of her existence. For decades, no one knew who the woman in the photograph truly was. Then, in 1998, researchers at the Orolsen archives cross-referenced deportation and intelligence files from occupied Poland. They found a handwritten note in a German officer's personnel folder, Emil Weiss's. The note read simply, "Translator Krawiecz, missing, presumed executed, April 1944. But below that, in a different ink, was added, "Believed active under alias Jaskółka." Today, historians agree that Hannah Krawiecz, the girl in the photograph, was one of the many anonymous women whose silent work altered the course of resistance in Eastern Europe. Her methods were invisible, her face almost lost, but her courage left measurable ripples in history. In the archives of the Polish Underground Museum in Warsaw, a single surviving photograph hangs on display. It shows a young woman walking through snow, unaware of the camera, the same photograph taken by Weiss in 1943. The caption reads, "Identity unknown. Believed to be Courier Jaskółka, Warsaw, 1943." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "Sometimes the smallest act of defiance leaves the longest shadow." Chapter 3. The Photographer's Confession. When the war ended in May of 1945, Europe looked like a continent that had burned through its own reflection. Cities were reduced to ash and silence, and millions of names simply vanished into unmarked graves and unrecorded lists. In the ruins of Berlin, Allied officers began collecting what remained of the German archives: reels of film, boxes of negatives, and thousands of confiscated photographs once used for propaganda. Among them, catalogued under Kriegsbildabteilung, Section 7, was a folder marked W. Emil, Confidential. Inside were nearly 100 photographs, none of them propaganda. Instead of parades and soldiers, the images showed executions, burned villages, mass transports, and collapsed bridges. They were precise, steady, almost surgical in composition. And in the margins of many negatives, scratched faintly with a knife, were numbers and initials, a coded index that no one at the time could decipher. But one photograph stood out. It showed a woman standing on a railway platform, snow melting on the brim of her scarf. Her face was turned slightly away from the camera, but her eyes were open. Alive. On the back of the print, in faded pencil, someone had written, "HK, 1943, do not destroy." That note would lead investigators to the man behind the lens, Emil Weiss, former photographer of the German press office in Warsaw. When the Allies captured Weiss in Bavaria later that summer, he didn't deny who he was. He told them he had photographed everything the Reich wanted and everything it didn't. He was placed under interrogation at the Camp 121 Intelligence Unit, where transcripts of his statements would later form part of the Nuremberg evidence archives. In those records, his testimony begins with a single line. "The camera does not lie, but men do." Endlessly. Weiss claimed that in 1942, while working under Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda, he began to realize that official photography was a form of censorship, showing only what power wanted the world to see. He decided to do the opposite. Using unmarked rolls of Agfa film, he began documenting what German censors ordered destroyed: deportations, shootings, public hangings. He smuggled copies of these negatives into civilian courier channels, often hiding them inside envelopes labeled film defective or return to sender. Those envelopes, investigators later discovered, reached the Polish underground network that historians now link directly to Hanna Kroik. Kuka. Weiss insisted he never met her after 1943, but his notebooks told a different story. In 1946, Allied prosecutors studying his notes found a series of entries marked only by dates. March 22, 1943. She came for the translations. The eyes again. April 10, 1943. Smoke from the ghetto. I took the photograph she requested. She asked for silence. I could not refuse. April 22, 1943. They will find her soon. She knows. The swallow flies east. These fragments were cross-referenced with his photographs and with intercepted courier reports. The alignment was exact. Each note matched a sabotage operation or a known underground communication. The photograph she requested, prosecutors realized, referred to the staged portrait of Hannah with the coded Morse pattern on her collar, the one that had helped derail the deportation train. Weiss's images had not only documented war crimes. Transstered in Nye Spain transmitted intelligence, and he had done it under the nose of the Reich itself. During his Nuremberg testimony in October 1946, Weiss was visibly shaken. He spoke slowly, choosing his words as if they might still incriminate someone alive. "I believed I was preserving evidence," he said, "but I was wrong. I was preserving her." When asked who her referred to, Weiss paused for nearly a full minute before answering. "The translator. The girl in the photograph. She risked more with words than I ever did with film." Weiss described how Hannah's translations were not simple linguistic tasks. They were weapons. She altered small details in German dispatches. One letter in a name, one digit in a convoy number, enough to delay an arrest or redirect a shipment. Those subtle distortions saved lives, but also exposed her to death if discovered. He admitted that when the Gestapo began investigating leaks from the Kommandantur, he deliberately substituted her personnel file with a false reassignment notice, effectively erasing her from official records. It was his way of keeping her alive, and yet he never saw her again. After the trial, Weiss was not charged with war crimes. Instead, he was kept under restricted supervision as a witness for the prosecution. In 1951, he returned to civilian life in Munich, where he opened a small photo studio. He never remarried, never spoke publicly about Warsaw again. But his private letters, declassified in 1995, revealed the depth of his guilt. In one, addressed to a journalist, he wrote, "People ask why I photographed the ruins. They think I was documenting history. I was not. I was searching for her face in the ashes." He died in 1964, leaving behind an unfinished manuscript titled The Negative. In it, he describes the act of photography as a form of confession, light carving truth into silver. The final line reads, "Every picture is a witness. The question is, who survives to tell it?" Today, several of Weiss's photographs are preserved at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Among them, 3 are marked source uncertain, but researchers who compared them to Polish Home Army records discovered small, deliberate flaws in the exposure, faint dots and scratches forming coded words. The same pattern appears in each frame: Jaskółka, swallow. These silent signatures are now recognized by historians as proof that both Weiss and Hannah collaborated in one of the most subtle intelligence operations of the Warsaw Resistance, turning propaganda into evidence and photographs into lifelines. Their partnership, fragile and wordless, bridged two opposing worlds: oppressor and victim, truth and obedience, survival and guilt. In 2018, a restoration team working on the Arelson Archive digital project discovered a final roll of film mislabeled Miscellaneous Personnel. On frame 17, they found a blurred image of a woman standing in the ruins of a bridge, holding a piece of broken camera glass in her hand. The image is too damaged for full identification, but metadata confirmed it was shot on Emil Weiss's Leica in March 1944. The last caption he ever wrote, etched faintly on the celluloid, reads, "She asked for silence. I gave her light." Chapter 4. The Evidence. By the spring of 1946, the war was over. But the truth was still buried. Nuremberg had become more than a city. It was a reckoning. Inside a former Nazi courthouse, prosecutors from the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union gathered to confront a mountain of paper and film. The fragments of an empire that had tried to erase its own crimes. Tens of thousands of documents were recovered, but one small wooden crate drew unusual attention. Stamped on its lid was a faded marking: Abt für Bild und Presse. Warsaw Division. Inside, packed between rolls of 35mm negatives, were several dozen contact sheets bearing the same signature: E. Weiss. The photographs inside were unlike anything else the Allies had found. They weren't propaganda stills, nor military portraits. They were records of horror: deportations, shootings, burned villages, bridges in flames. And yet, they were methodically composed, numbered, and preserved. One prosecutor called them the conscience of a camera. Among these images, investigators noticed a recurring subject: a young woman appearing in multiple frames, always in the background, always slightly out of focus. In one, she's seen carrying a file folder through the Kommandantur courtyard. In another, her reflection appears in a window near a group of German officers. And in a third, the famous photograph, the woman in the scarf, looking directly toward the lens in the winter of 1943. At first, prosecutors thought she was just another civilian, an anonymous bystander caught in Weiss's lens. But when the negatives were examined under magnification, forensic analysts noticed faint scratches along the film edges, tiny dots and lines forming coded marks. It was Morse code. After translation, the message read, "Convoy 17, Lublin, 4 March, sabotage confirmed." The code matched an intercepted Allied communication from 1943, proof that Weiss's photographs had been used as a covert channel of intelligence transmission. In essence, the photographs were not just evidence of atrocities, they were evidence of resistance. American prosecutors introduced the photos during Day 68 of the Nuremberg trials, under the classification Exhibit 812B. They were presented by Captain Robert Story, head of the U.S. Evidence Division, who referred to them as the Warsaw Negatives. For the first time, the tribunal saw what was previously unimaginable: not just written orders, but visual proof of genocide. The burned homes of Zamość, the deportation lines outside the Warsaw Ghetto, the smoke rising from Treblinka's rail spur. In the gallery, witnesses wept. Judges turned away. But for historians, one image drew particular attention: the girl with the scarf, her eyes half hidden, the snow melting on her lashes. The caption read only, "Translator, Warsaw, 1943." In 1947, a Polish liaison officer working with the Allied documentation team identified her. He recognized the face from Underground Courier reports. He wrote a note in the margin of the photo's log sheet: possible codename, Jaskółka. That annotation changed everything. It linked Weiss's photographs to the Polish resistance's most elusive informant, the Swallow. Further analysis of Weiss's personal papers confirmed that he had indeed collaborated with an unnamed translator in the Warsaw Kommandantur. She had access to deportation orders, prisoner manifests, and German troop movements. Her information had reached the Home Army through hidden markings in official correspondence, and through photographs smuggled out of the press office. One of the most haunting discoveries came from a sealed envelope found among Weiss's possessions after his arrest. Inside were two undeveloped negatives, each wrapped in medical gauze. When restored decades later, the images revealed scenes from April 19, 1943, the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In one frame, a column of smoke rises behind a row of burning tenements. In the lower right corner, almost imperceptible, is the reflection of a woman's face in a broken shop window. Digital restoration in 2008 confirmed what historians long suspected. Iturchain Kaudand. The Sanda Derer. The same woman, Hannah Krawiec. That image, now preserved in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, is labeled simply Anonymous Polish Courier, 1943, photographer E. Weiss. During the trials, Allied prosecutors debated how much of Weiss's testimony to include. He was both a witness and a participant, a man who had served the Reich but also betrayed it through his lens. In the end, the court accepted his photographs as evidence of crimes, but his words were sealed. Only years later, when his private notebooks were declassified, did the full story emerge. The collaboration between Weiss and the unnamed translator, the coded photographs, the vanished courier known as Swallow. In 1950, when the Polish government compiled its official list of wartime intelligence contributors, one entry stood out for its brevity. Jaskółka, female, Warsaw, 1943-44. Identity, unknown. Confirmed contribution, sabotage of transport convoys, transmission of photographic intelligence to London. Status, presumed executed. But the Nuremberg evidence told a different story. The coded marks found on Weiss's final negatives suggested that Hannah was still active as late as March 1944, months after she was reported missing. That meant her disappearance was not an execution. It was an escape. In 2010, archivists at the Arolsen Archives digitized a set of Red Cross repatriation files from 1945. Among them, a faded card listed Krawiec, Hannah, nationality Polish, location unknown, last seen Munich, April 1945. If true, that would mean she survived the war. No further record was found. Her fate remains uncertain, but her image endures. Today, Weiss's photographs hang in museums across Europe and the United States. Visitors walk past the glass cases, unaware that among the anonymous faces is one woman who risked everything not with a gun or a uniform, but with a typewriter, a code, and a photograph. In the dim light of the exhibition room, her eyes still look directly at the viewer. Calm, watchful, unflinching. The caption beneath the photograph reads, Warsaw, 1943, the translator who turned words into weapons. Chapter 5. The Vanishing. In the years following the war, Europe tried to rebuild not just its cities, but its memory. Millions were missing. Their names echoed through Red Cross files, church ledgers, and the corridors of refugee camps. For many, the search for truth became its own kind of survival. Among those names was one that kept reappearing: Krawiec, Hannah. Nationality, Polish. Occupation, translator. Last seen, April 1945. Status, unconfirmed. For decades, no one could say what happened to her, until fragments began to surface, quietly, in archives across 3 countries. The first clue, Munich, 1945. In a displaced persons camp outside Munich, Red Cross workers compiled lists of refugees awaiting repatriation. Most were survivors of forced labor or concentration camps. One handwritten page, dated April 29, 1945, records a woman claiming to be Anna Krawiec, 26 years old, from Warsaw. To casual eyes, the spelling looked ordinary, Krawiec instead of Krawiec. But researchers later discovered a second note in the same file. Speaks fluent German and Russian. Previously employed as translator, Warsaw District. Declines transport to Poland. Destination, Lyon, France. The handwriting on that form was distinctive, precise, academic, and nearly identical to the Polish resistance document signed by the courier known as Jaskółka. It was the first tangible hint that Hannah might have survived. The trail in France. By late 1946, Europe was awash with displaced people searching for anonymity. In Lyon, French police recorded the arrival of a woman named Anne Krauss, working as a typist for a local import office. She rented a small room above a bakery, paid in cash, and avoided neighbors' questions. No one thought much of her, until 1951, when an American journalist named Thomas Herrick began researching an article about former Nazi photographers who had worked for the Allied tribunals. In his notes, Herrick mentioned visiting a photo exhibition in Lyon featuring a private collector, a woman with a Polish accent who owned negatives from Warsaw, 1943. He described her as quiet, precise, and strangely protective of a single image, a young woman in a scarf, looking at the camera. Herrick tried to interview her, but she refused. She told him only one thing: photographs don't tell stories, they keep secrets. When he returned to the gallery the next day, she was gone. The collection had been closed, the rooms emptied, no forwarding address. The second clue, Paris, 1960. In 1960, French intelligence declassified a series of Cold War surveillance files. One dossier, codenamed Le Moineau, the Sparrow, contained reports of a mysterious woman who had worked as a translator for both Allied intelligence and refugee agencies after the war. Her fluency in German and Russian drew suspicion during the height of Soviet infiltration fears. A surveillance memo described her as female, approximately 40 years old, Polish origin. Lives alone, 11th arrondissement. Avoids attention. Carries a small silver brooch in the shape of a bird. The file closed abruptly in 1961. No arrest, no disappearance notice, just a final handwritten line. No further observation required. Subject deceased. Natural causes. No burial record was ever found. The letters. In 1999, a curator at the Polish Underground Museum received a parcel from Lyon during an archival exchange. Inside was a tin box containing 3 undeveloped film rolls, a brooch, and a sealed envelope. The letter inside, written in French, was dated August 14, 1958. It read, "If these reach Warsaw, return them to history, not to me." The man behind the camera tried to save what words could not. I did the same, in silence. Tell them. There were witnesses who never spoke because they were never asked. It was signed simply, H.K. The handwriting matched the wartime reports of Jaskółka. Rediscovery. The film reels from that package were developed in 2003. They contained never-before-seen photographs of Warsaw's destruction in 1944, including one that stunned historians. Amid the rubble of a bridge, a woman stands facing the camera, wearing a scarf, a small swallow pinned to her collar. Her face is older, sharper, but unmistakable. She is holding a broken camera lens in her hands, the same one Emil Weiss used during the occupation. The caption etched on the negative reads, "For those who looked away." This was the last known image connected to Hannah Krawiec. The legacy today, historians consider her story one of the most extraordinary examples of civilian resistance through intelligence and documentation. Her collaboration with Emil Weiss turned photography into a form of coded communication, a weapon made of light. While the world remembers generals, battles, and borders, it often forgets the invisible people who fought wars with nothing but memory and courage. Hannah's name still doesn't appear in most textbooks. She has no grave. But her photograph, the one taken in 1943 on a cold Warsaw street, has become an icon of defiance. In museums across Europe, the label beneath that image reads simply, "The Unknown Translator." But in the archives, her codename remains. Jaskółka, the swallow, the woman who vanished so that truth could survive. Chapter 6. The legacy of light history is often written by those who win, but remembered because of those who watched. When researchers at the Arelson Archives began digitizing post-war records in the early 2000s, they stumbled upon a pattern that changed how historians viewed photography during World War II. Dozens of coded photographs scattered across Europe shared the same microscopic marks, dots, lines, scratches, all pointing back to Warsaw. The source was finally traced to two people, Emil Weiss and Hanna Krawiec. Together, they had transformed the camera, a tool of propaganda, into an instrument of truth. Weiss captured the atrocities the Reich tried to hide. Hanna embedded the information the world needed to see. Their silent collaboration, forgotten for half a century, became the foundation for a new understanding of how resistance could exist without weapons. The rediscovery. In 2012, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum unveiled a small, dimly lit exhibition called The Witnesses of Light. At its center was a single photograph. The girl in the scarf, taken on a snowy Warsaw street in 1943. Visitors often stopped in silence. To them, it was just a haunting image, a civilian caught in the machinery of occupation. But behind the glass, a small caption revealed the deeper story. This photograph, once used as Nazi propaganda, contained coded intelligence for the Polish underground. Its subject, a translator known only as Jaskółka, risked her life to send messages hidden in film grain. In that moment, the anonymous girl became a symbol, not of despair, but of defiance. The museum's archivists had traced her path through over 60 documents, from Warsaw to Krakow to Munich, and finally to Lyon. Every clue pointed to the same handwriting, the same careful pen strokes, the mark of a woman who never stopped recording, even when the world stopped listening. From film to justice. The rediscovery of Weiss's negatives had another, unexpected consequence. Several of his photographs, including those taken under Hanna's direction, were re-examined by forensic historians in the 21st century. Tiny landmarks in the backgrounds of his frames help confirm the exact locations of mass executions that had remained unverified for decades. One series, showing the burned remains of villages near Lublin, became critical evidence in identifying the perpetrators of war crimes previously attributed to anonymous SS units. Another set, labeled Bridge Siedlce District, matched the sabotage described in resistance reports, the same act Hanna had helped coordinate through her coded messages. What began as a photograph turned into proof, and proof became justice. The modern influence. Today, military historians and photojournalists alike cite the Warsaw Method, the practice of embedding hidden data within visual media, as one of the earliest examples of covert documentation. Long before digital watermarks or encrypted metadata, Hanna and Weiss used scratches and light to smuggle truth across borders. This concept influenced everything from Cold War intelligence photography to modern human rights investigations. Organizations like Bellingcat and Amnesty International's Evidence Lab now apply similar principles, reading images for hidden patterns, verifying time, place, and authenticity to expose war crimes in the 21st century. In a sense, Hanna's idea survived her, turning resistance into a methodology. The photograph that endured. In 2021, a high-resolution restoration of Weiss's original film revealed something no one had seen before. Along the edge of the frame, nearly invisible under decades of dust, were three faint letters etched by hand: HK. The initials confirmed beyond doubt that the girl in the photograph and the courier, known as Swallow, were the same person. After nearly 80 years, the mystery had come full circle. The restored image now hangs in both the Warsaw Rising Museum and the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Two continents. One story. Visitors still pause before it, drawn not by horror, but by the strange calm of her expression. Her gaze cuts through the decades like a question left unanswered. Who else was watching? And what did they choose not to see? The meaning of light. Historians often describe Weiss's and Hannah's work as resistance through observation. But for those who study their legacy, it's something deeper. A moral lesson about the power of seeing. Because every act of witnessing is an act of courage. Every photograph taken in truth is a small rebellion against forgetting. In one of Weiss's final letters, preserved in the Bavarian State Archive, he wrote, "Light does not forgive. It remembers." That line became the closing inscription of the exhibition, "The Girl in the Photograph." It stands beneath her portrait to this day, a quiet memorial to two people who used nothing but a camera and a typewriter to fight a world built on lies. Epilogue. There are no verified graves for either of them, no medals, no monuments, no headlines. But their story lives wherever light meets film, wherever truth survives in fragments. Every flash of a camera, every act of documentation carries their legacy, the belief that even in darkness, evidence can become a form of hope. And somewhere, in the silver shadows of an old photograph, a young woman still walks through the snow of Warsaw, eyes steady, scarf lifted by the wind, leaving behind a history that finally learned to see her.